So, what is your grief signature? So tell me about I'll read you the prompt actually. Every person has a unique grief signature, a pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that emerge in the face of loss. This is your chance to map out your own. Think about a significant loss you have experienced and describe your process. So some things you can think about are: what does your grief actually look and feel like? What are some personal pitfalls or coping mechanisms you experience? Who is your grief role model, and how does your signature compare to the official stories of grief?
Okay. So for me, I'm not somebody that becomes intensely emotional. I find that to be very awkward, and I don't like it when people just like start screaming because they're upset. Freaks me out a lot. For me, being like grief, I do become more numb and attached to it all because I think it's a way to like compartmentalize away from like having to deal with it in that moment. I think grief comes in waves and in different points in your life. Like things will make you remember that person and bring it up, and then you get sad again. But I'm never somebody that's gonna show it. Like if I have my grief hits me like when I'm in the shower and I'm by myself, I'm like I can be sad without anyone having to know. It's not something I like to talk about. It's not something I necessarily bring it up, and I'm just not somebody that gets real like screaming and attached and super emotional because that just isn't me. Like I don't want to draw attention to it. I don't want anyone to know what I'm experiencing, and I kind of just want to be able to handle it on my own.
Do you have any personal pitfalls for your coping mechanisms?
I definitely overwork more when I'm sad because it's a way to not feel. When you're so busy with something and working all the time, you have less time for your mind to wander and to think about things that make you sad. And so
What do you do for work?
Oh, I work in a hospital as a medical scribe, specifically in the ER. So I'm surrounded by grief. 90% of my week is spent with different, because it comes from everything to like people losing their children, to people losing loved ones, and to older people. Like there's all sorts of death happening, and so you kind of experience your grief in your own way and the grief that other people are going through.
Do you have any grief role models?
I think a lot of my grief models come from like watching how the doctors handle it, who go through having to tell their loved ones, like different people, like in their loved ones, that their family member has died or is going to die in the presence like coming up, and how they like are able to compartmentalize and not let it affect the rest of their day while also still respecting the patients and his patient's family members. I remember one time I watched a doctor tell these people that their loved one was dying, and they were so respectful of him and the way he handled it. In the end, they ended up just shaking his hand and thanking him for all that he had done, even though their loved one died in the end. The way he handled it and allowed their loved one to die the way they wanted to, in the way that was respectful of everyone involved, was truly just something that was really remarkable to watch.
Do you feel like your career has helped you at all with that?
I think so. I think when you experience loved ones learning that they're like learning, watching loved ones learning that their loved one is going to die, like watching it through other people's perspectives, you see how people handle it and who handles it well and why and how they handle it, and the different techniques to telling somebody, hey, like this is going to be the outcome and there's nothing we can do about it, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is the process, and these are the choices that you have to make. It's interesting to see like how that happens, and it's something I've definitely learned through time, is like how I would want it done and how I would want to tell somebody else that they were going to lose someone they loved.
Do you think your grief signature compares well or aligns with popular models like the 5 stages, or do you see elements of coping ugly in your process?
I find it more to be a little bit different. Like I think you align in different ways, but I don't think it necessarily aligns with coping ugly or like 5 stages, because I don't think grief happens linearly. I think it comes in waves and in different parts, and like you can jump back and forth through different things, and like you never really get over it. Like you never really get over the loss of a loved one. Like things become easier with time and it becomes easier to talk about them, but there will days you will always be sad, and it's just something that you learn to live with and you learn to process. You never really get over it. You just learn how to move on and to live with the sadness that's there.
It's almost like you've sat in my class. Part 2, the judgment of grief. Have you ever felt like your grief was judged or misunderstood?
I think so. I think sometimes it's hard, especially in healthcare, that it comes off that you're being cold, but in reality, you're just compartmentalizing because you can't be super expressive or upset when you go from one room to another room, because you don't want the other patient to know what's going on, and you want them to all feel like they're the most important. And it's hard when you go from telling somebody, hey, I'm so sorry, but your loved one is going to die, to go into a room to tell somebody the greatest news of their life, like they're having a baby.
You're pregnant.
It's so hard to kind of go through. Like if you allow the grief to hit you, it's hard to go from one room to another, and you have to get through the rest of your day. And on long 12-hour shifts, you can't let every emotion hit because it's just going to be too much by the end. You have to learn how to compartmentalize and process it at a later time when you can truly feel it and get through it. And so I think it's hard because I do think it gets misjudged just, well, you're just being cold, when in reality you just can't experience it right now because you have too much going on to actually process it in a healthy way.
It's a later problem.
Exactly.
Conversely, have you ever judged someone else's grief? Maybe reflect on a time you've witnessed someone else's loss and found yourself thinking that they were not grieving enough, being too dramatic, or moving on too quickly. What expectations were you placing on them, and where do you think those expectations come from?
I think there are times when I definitely judge people's grief for being too much in a way, or too exaggerated, or too like dramatic, because it freaks me out when people are just screaming. It's a lot, and like I understand
Overstimulated.
It overstimulates me, and it's a lot to watch somebody sit there and just scream. But I think it comes from my own feelings of like that, like secondhand embarrassment in a way where like it's, you don't necessarily intend it, but like you would never do that, and it makes you uncomfortable, so you're judging them when in reality it's just because you are uncomfortable and you would never do that, even though like that's for them the best way for them to grieve is to be very dramatic and very like upset about it, which makes sense. It's just hard to put yourself in that position if you are not somebody that grieves that way, because I feel like everyone grieves differently, which is perfectly healthy and perfectly normal. So it's hard when you grieve differently than somebody else to not intend, even if you don't intentionally do it, it's really hard not to judge somebody else's grief because it's different than yours.
Do you have any final thoughts you want to add before I end this recording? The answer can be no.
I think it's been a very interesting thing to think about, and it's definitely made me think a lot about grief and how it affects other people. I think it's important to remember that grief isn't linear. It happens in all different ways to all different people at all different times. And it's not something I think it's easy to think about, oh, well, it's been so long, it doesn't bother me anymore, when in reality, grief isn't like that. It hits at different times, and it hits in different parts of your life. Like you can lose somebody that you loved as a child, and then you go to get married, and it's been 20 years and you're getting married, and you still remember that person, and you wish they were there with you. Even though it's been so long, you never really get over it. You always want them there. Or like you finally, like, you graduate college and you were so excited for your grandparents to be there, and then they've passed away and now they're not there, and like it's been years, and you've come, like, even though like their death was expected and you've come to terms with it, it's still hard when you want them and you can't have them. And so I think that's just important to remember with grief.
All right. Thanks, Madelyn.